It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind Sybil used to love. Sunlight resting gently on the garden, her roses in full bloom, the air thick with the scent of lavender and old memories. I sat on her favorite bench, the one she used to call her thinking throne, staring blankly at the empty spot where her chair used to be by the fountain. She'd been gone a week. Everything still smelled like her. Strong coffee, cedarwood perfume, the leather-bound notebook she scribbled in at dawn. Sybil was never just a grandmother to me. She raised me, sharpened me, said I needed tougher skin because life didn't wait for the gentle. I always thought I was her favorite, though she never said it. But she raised me different, firmer, like she knew I'd be left to handle what others couldn't. The crunch of footsteps on gravel snapped me back. A man in a gray suit approached, holding a sealed envelope with the law firm's crest. He handed it over wordlessly, nodded once, then left. I turned it over. My name, just mine, scrawled in Sybil's familiar cursive. Inside was a single page typed, signed, stamped. She'd left everything to me, her entire empire, $10 billion in assets. No conditions, no explanations. I read it 3 times before I even breathed. My fingers trembled. My heart didn't race. It stalled. I felt cornered, not chosen. Why me? Why not Cordell? He was the eldest. Lydia. She worked in the family company longer than I did. But there it was, in ink and law. Sybil hadn't left me a fortune. She'd left me a war. They made it look polite at first. Cordell sat at the head of the family room table where Sybil used to preside like a general. He wore his sympathy like an ill-fitting suit, too stiff, too clean. Lydia sat beside him, arms folded, lip gloss untouched. I barely had time to sit down before Cordell leaned forward. "You know this isn't fair," he said. "I didn't write the will," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But you can change it," Lydia added, voice sharp like broken glass. "You know nothing about running a conglomerate. You're just a placeholder." "She left it to me," I said quietly. "That's her will. I'm honoring it." Cordell's smile was thin. "We all know Grandma had her blind spots. You were her pet project. But this is bigger than personal attachments. This is about the legacy." I stared at him. "You mean your control?" No one spoke. Then Cordell said calmly, "You can either share the weight or be crushed by it." Lydia laughed once, bitter. "Let him try. He'll drown in suits and debt before the year's out." Their words weren't just bitter. They were warnings dressed as family concern. They didn't see me as a brother anymore. I was a barrier. Back home, I poured a glass of water and sat down with the letter again. The paper felt heavier now. As I flipped it over, something slipped out, a smaller handwritten note. Her handwriting, messier, rushed, emotional. "Don't trust blood over truth." She'd written it like she knew this moment would come. "There's a deposit box. Chase Bank, Unit 0423. Go alone. And remember, power only belongs to those who've known powerlessness." My throat tightened. Sybil had never praised me for my grades or paychecks. She admired quiet strength, the way I survived college while juggling 2 jobs, how I stayed calm when Dad left. She said it made me steel, not stone. Reading her note, I didn't feel chosen anymore. I felt entrusted. This wasn't about wealth. It was about legacy and protecting it. That night, an email arrived from an anonymous address. No message, just an audio file. I hit play. Cordell's voice. "We'll say he's unstable. He had therapy sessions in college, right? That's enough to start questioning his mental fitness. Get the board involved. Undermine him before he even knows what's happening." Another voice, calm and clipped. "A lawyer. We'll need documentation. But if we plant the right stories, the media will do half the work." I stopped the playback. For a minute, I sat there, just breathing. So this was it. Not concern, not disappointment. A plan, a knife in the back. All those years they smiled at me, called me kid, told me I was lucky Grandma cared, and the first chance they got, they'd turn my past into a weapon. Sybil's warning echoed louder now. They weren't family anymore. They were contenders. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a small bag, set my alarm. Tomorrow, I'd go to that deposit box, alone. The next morning came earlier than I expected. Sleep had been shallow, broken by replayed words and imagined betrayals. By 7:15, I was downtown, parked across from the old Bank of America where Grandma kept her accounts for decades. I remembered coming here as a kid, tagging along while she spoke to the tellers like they were family. Back then, I thought the vault was a magical place that held treasures. This time, it felt more like a tomb. The manager greeted me at the entrance, recognizing me immediately. "You're Sybil's grandson, right? You had the science project with the solar panels. She talked about you all the time." I nodded. "Yeah, that was a long time ago." He walked me down the private corridor without saying much more. The deeper we went, the colder the air got, thick with silence and something I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Expectation. The vault door loomed ahead. I pulled out both keys, mine and the older brass one I'd dug out of her sewing kit the night before. One click, then the next. The metal drawer slid open with a weight that made my chest tighten. Inside were just 3 items: a leather-bound notebook, a small USB drive, and a faded black and white photo of Grandma with a man I didn't recognize. Her handwriting was on a yellowed index card laid over the notebook. "Read. Don't react. Think before you speak." She always knew how to get my attention. Even now, I didn't open the notebook there. I placed everything back in the box and carried it out with me. The weight of it wasn't physical, but it was heavy all the same. I drove home in silence. Once I got there, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and sat at the kitchen table. I opened the notebook slowly. The first page had Cordell's name underlined twice in red ink. The entries weren't random, they were methodical, spanning back 5 years. She logged wire transfers, company invoices that never matched, and shell corporations that traced back to Cordell's name through a maze of offshore accounts. She even had dates of meetings, names of associates, one of them being a known political lobbyist who had just been indicted last year. There was more: bribes, covered audits, quiet payouts. Grandma hadn't been guessing. She'd built a case like a prosecutor. I flipped back to the photo. That man beside her, mid-50s, glasses, tired eyes. I recognized him now. He'd been in the news a few years ago. Blew the whistle on a pharma company hiding side effects from cancer patients. Got jail time for misuse of proprietary data. But everyone knew it was retaliation. She had him helping her, which meant this wasn't paranoia. She knew what was coming. I plugged the USB into my laptop, half expecting it to explode, but it was just one voice memo. Her voice, calm, slower than I remembered, maybe from the chemo. "If you're hearing this, it means they've already started. Cordell will try to paint this as a misunderstanding, maybe even drag Lydia into the spotlight to soften the blow. But none of this is about love or loss. It's about power." I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I didn't choose you because you're perfect. I chose you because you were never afraid to say no when everyone else said yes. You've always seen through the masks. That's not weakness, it's clarity." There was a pause. "Document everything. Assume nothing. They'll use family as a weapon, they always do. And if you stay quiet, the company, the values, everything I built, it will rot from the inside." Her voice cracked near the end. "Don't let the boy I raised become a puppet for the ones I shielded you from." I sat still for a long time. The words settled into my bones like cold water. She wasn't asking me to avenge her. She was passing the torch. I grabbed the photo again, stared at it, then looked back at the files. Every instinct said to burn them, pretend it never happened, walk away with the inheritance and let the sharks eat each other. But I knew I couldn't do that. Grandma raised me better. By noon, I was sitting in my truck again, parked in the same spot for nearly an hour. I hadn't moved, just sat there, the engine off, holding the USB in one hand and the photo in the other, staring out at nothing. I didn't want to be the guy who went public with this. But I also knew I couldn't let Cordell twist this into another family misunderstanding while he erased her legacy and handed it to crooks. I opened my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the name. Devin Hargrove. We'd been roommates in college. He used to sneak into protests with a voice recorder and a fake press badge. Now he was an investigative journalist, halfway between famous and fired, depending on the week. I hit call. "Devin," I said, "I need to talk, not for a story. Just for clarity." He didn't ask questions, just gave me his address and said, "I'll leave the door open." The drive across town was quiet. just the soft hum of tires against pavement and the occasional tap of wind against the window. My mind ran in loops. What to say, what not to say, how to even begin. But none of it mattered. Because the moment I walked into Devin's apartment, the first thing I saw was a manila envelope already sitting on his desk, my name written across it, in Cordell's handwriting. I sat in my truck outside Devin's place for a few more minutes after seeing the envelope with Cordell's handwriting. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Whatever was inside, it could wait. I needed to clear my head first. That's when the text came in. Dinner tonight. Family only. 7 sharp. Bring your appetite. Cordell. I stared at the screen. Classic Cordell. Dressing up manipulation like hospitality. Still, I went. Not out of politeness, not even out of curiosity, just strategy. Sometimes you need to sit at the table to know what's being served. His house looked more like a modern museum now. Cold marble floors, oversized abstract art that screamed, "Look at me," without saying a thing. The furniture was expensive, but somehow no one looked comfortable in it. His wife, Angela, greeted me at the door. Her smile was warm, but her eyes darted. "Good to see you," she said, brushing my arm lightly like we were still close. We weren't. She led me to the dining room. The table stretched long, enough for a dozen guests, but only 6 seats were set. Mine was at the far end, away from Cordell's corner seat, angled just off center like it was a director's chair on a bad stage. Cordell walked in last, holding a glass of bourbon like it was a scepter. "Well, look who came back to the lion's den," he grinned. "Let's bury the hatchet, huh?" The man knew how to throw shade with a handshake. Dinner started light, small talk, stories about Grandma, her famous burnt cornbread, the time she slapped a board member with her handbag, the usual recycled laughs. But Cordell couldn't help himself. "You must be overwhelmed," he said, turning his glass slowly in his fingers. "All that power in your hands now. Feels heavy, I bet." I shrugged. "I'm managing." His smile grew tighter. "You know this family thrives when the right people are in charge. Been that way for generations." I said nothing. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice but not his volume. "The press loves a clean story. So do shareholders. Chaos rattles the stock." It was the way he said chaos that twisted something in my gut, like he was measuring how far he could push without making it obvious. I looked at him squarely. "I don't think Grandma left me the company because I was easy to rattle." Angela's fork slipped and clinked against her plate. Cordell chuckled like we were still playing. "Come on now, we've all made mistakes, but we fixed them together. That's what legacy is about." I pushed back my chair slightly. Legacy doesn't come from fixing lies. It comes from facing them. He blinked slowly, then poured another drink. I remembered that move from when we were kids. Every time Dad lost his temper or the board questioned his numbers, Cordell would do the same thing. Refill, reset, reframe. He set the glass down hard. "I protected this family's name while you played poor," he said under his breath. Angela flinched. I stared at him. "You protected your version of the name. Let's not confuse ego with history." That hung in the air. Forks froze. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. He shifted, tried to soften. "You're still young. This kind of pressure, it breaks people sometimes." He told a story about our cousin Alan, who'd had a mental breakdown during a merger negotiation 10 years ago. Ended up in a facility in Arizona. It sounded like concern, but I knew better. "You wouldn't want the board thinking you're unstable," he said. "Not after everything Grandma built." I smiled just enough to keep it civil. I always thought emotional stability meant being able to say no. His eyes narrowed just a blink. He knew, or suspected. Maybe he'd seen the USB before. Maybe he just sensed the shift. Either way, he wasn't bluffing anymore. I stood. "Thanks for dinner," I said, lifting my glass in a quiet toast. "To clarity. May it come before it's too late." Angela didn't move. Cordell didn't blink. I walked out with my spine straight, heart steady. But I knew it. Something had shifted. The smile was gone. The gloves were off. He didn't need to shout. The threat was already made. I didn't sleep the night after that dinner. I laid there staring at the ceiling while Cordell's voice replayed in my mind, sentence by sentence. His tone, his phrasing. It wasn't random. He wasn't just needling me. He was testing ground, pushing the boundary to see how close he could get without triggering a fight. And I let him. The next morning, before the sun even warmed the blinds, I opened my laptop to check my email, half routine, half reflex. There it was, buried in my private company inbox. No name, no greeting, just a short message. He's already lining up votes. Start paying attention. Beneath it, a file attachment. I opened it. Partial transcript. Someone had recorded a call between Cordell and one of the board members. Most of it was vague, coded language, phrases like, "We'll get the weight back where it belongs," and "he's not ready to lead." But I knew exactly what they meant. My hands didn't shake from fear. They shook from knowing I was right. This wasn't about me being paranoid. It was about me waking up too late. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the screen, then closed my eyes. Grandma once told me, when they start whispering behind your back, it's because they're scared of what you might say out loud. I sat with that. That same morning, after a quick shower and a half-eaten piece of toast, I called our family attorney, Brian Thatch. I didn't mention the email. Just asked if any paperwork had shifted on the estate front. He was casual, too casual. "Oh, just a minor thing," he said. "Cordell asked to review some holdings last week, nothing actionable, just historical interest." Cordell never cared about historical interest. If he was reviewing holdings, he was mapping terrain, finding cracks in the walls Grandma built. I thanked Brian, ended the call, and stared at my own reflection in the black screen of my laptop. I was losing control, not publicly, not obviously, but I could feel it. The narrative was moving, without me in it. By noon, I locked my apartment door, turned my phone off, drew every blind, not out of fear, out of discipline. I didn't need more noise, I needed clarity. I opened the drawer where I kept the old notes from Grandma. Half recipes, half handwritten quotes she'd slide into my backpack growing up. One caught my eye. Faded ink, barely legible. "You can't control the wind, but you can set your sail." I read it twice. It didn't comfort me. It challenged me. What was my sail right now? What direction was I setting? I pulled out a yellow pad and started writing. What I don't know. Cordell's exact plan. Who's helping him? Whether the board's already halfway gone. What else he's forged. What he's rewriting behind closed doors. I wasn't questioning if something was happening anymore. I just didn't know how far it had already gone. Next morning, I put on my old blazer, one I hadn't worn since Grandma's last annual board dinner, and drove down to headquarters without telling a soul. No calendar invite, no PR heads up, no assistant. As I stepped into the lobby, I heard someone gasp. My old assistant, Jenna, who was quietly let go last year. She looked at me like I was a ghost. "You're not supposed to be here today," she whispered. That told me more than any email ever could. I nodded. "Thanks, Jenna." In the elevator, I counted the floors like I used to in college. 13 floors, and I still didn't know how many knives were waiting behind the doors. I walked into my office. At first glance, everything looked normal. Desk clean, chairs where I left them. Then I saw it, a fresh financial report, stapled, labeled, signed, only. I hadn't signed it, and at the bottom, next to my printed name, was a new phrase, Interim Review Committee Approval. I'd never authorized that committee. I'd never approved that budget. They weren't waiting to remove me. They were editing me out. I sat down, took out my phone, and started taking photos of everything. Page by page, email headers, metadata. Grandma always said, "Don't raise your voice, raise your pen." So I did. Later that night, I made tea like she used to, stood in the quiet of my apartment, and pulled her old Bible from the top shelf. I opened it not out of faith, but for safekeeping. I slid the anonymous message between Psalms and Proverbs, not for comfort, for reminder. War never starts with a sword. It starts with whispers. 2 days passed since I placed that message inside Grandma's Bible. I hadn't heard a word from Cordell or anyone on the board, just silence. But silence always has a tone if you listen close enough. That morning, I got the calendar alert. Status alignment meeting, attendance requested. No agenda, no pre-brief. Just a clean, corporate-sounding title for what I knew was anything but routine. I didn't go in blind. I spent the night before organizing every document I had. Grandma's original will, notarized asset statements, the email with the anonymous transcript. I printed out everything. I even highlighted the phrases I wouldn't say out loud unless forced. I wanted them to know I came ready. Walking into that boardroom felt like stepping onto a stage where every seat had already been filled and the lines were rehearsed, except mine. I nodded to a few familiar faces. Some smiled, some didn't. Most didn't meet my eyes at all. Cordell was already seated. Arms spread across the chair like a man who'd built the house brick by brick. He opened with a grin. "Glad you could make it, brother." I sat directly across from him. I didn't return the smile. The firm's general counsel kicked things off, talking about fiduciary clarity, roles of stewardship, and company image. Every phrase a soft pillow for the blow they were working toward. I didn't speak. Just watched Cordell lean back, confident. Then came his part. He presented a quarterly outlook, framed in concern but steeped in manipulation. Given the transitional leadership and unforeseen delays in public engagement, he said, the board may wish to consider temporary adjustments for stability. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a motion for interim reassignment of executive oversight. One of the board members, someone who used to sit beside Grandma at church, cleared his throat and added, "We've also heard concerns, emotional bandwidth, pressure." It's a lot for anyone. I stared at him. "You mean a rumor?" He blinked. "I'm just raising it as context." Another chimed in, questioning my absence from the media. "The public hasn't seen much of you. That creates uncertainty." Cordell didn't need to lift a finger. They were doing it for him. And still I didn't lose my cool, because Grandma always said, "Let them hang their drapes before you knock down the walls." When the lawyer gestured to open discussion, I finally spoke. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'd like to provide context, too." I opened my folder and slid out excerpts. Not everything, just enough. These documents came from my grandmother's private files. They detail patterns of misused corporate funds, back-channel dealings, and manipulation of audit reports over a 5-year span. I left the names redacted, but the trail was clear. The handwriting, the dates, the implications, it painted a picture no one could ignore. I didn't come here to attack. And I came here to ask a question. Do we reward manipulation, or do we honor the legacy of the person who built this? For a second, the room went still. Cordell scoffed under his breath and tried to cut in. "Let's not pretend." I raised my hand. "I let you speak, you'll let me finish." He froze. I continued. "This company wasn't built on comfort. It was built on grit, on clarity, on standing for something. And if you all think I'm the weak link because I haven't smiled for a camera lately, then maybe you've forgotten what strength looks like." They were listening now, not agreeing, but listening. I leaned forward. "So here's my offer. We do a full external audit, me and Cordell. Every asset, every transaction, every decision. If I've stepped outside my role, if I'm unfit, I'll resign right here." I paused. "But if the audit finds otherwise, if it confirms manipulation, coercion, or even the attempt at a hostile shift, then Cordell steps down from any decision-making capacity, publicly, permanently." You could feel the air suck out of the room. I looked at each of them. This is no longer a family dispute. This is about what kind of company you want your name tied to. Legacy matters, but only if it's honest. Cordell didn't move, didn't speak, but his jaw clenched. That was enough. Someone from the legal team cleared their throat. "We'll need to schedule a private vote in accordance with bylaws." I nodded. "I'll wait for it." And with that, I gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood. As I walked out, I didn't look back at the room, but I could feel Cordell's glare digging into my back. And for the first time, it didn't intimidate me. Because behind that glare, there wasn't anger. There was fear. I poured my morning coffee and stared at the dark screen of my laptop before turning it on. I replayed the boardroom moment in my head, how calm I had felt standing my ground. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe I had the upper hand. Then my phone rang. A friend texting, nearly shouting, "Open the news, now." I tapped my screen. My face popped up before my eyes, across multiple news sites, with headlines like, "Heiress unfit, mental health, hidden history, or PR trick." The betrayal hit me harder than any blow. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that the war had already gone public. Articles surfaced within minutes. Some accused me of manipulating Grandma during her sick days. Others claimed I pressured her to name me heir while she was vulnerable. Fake screenshots, her notes taken out of context, were shared in blogs and Reddit threads. One viral post showed an edited image of me signing forms in a hospital bed, branded, "Did she coerce him? Did she fear him?" News pundits questioned the will's legitimacy, eager to stir public outrage. Old college photos suddenly reappeared. Me from 10 years ago, middle of a breakup, huddled over a phone call. The captions twisted me into unstable or borderline erratic. My phone chimed. A message from Cordell. "Told you it wasn't over." I dropped to my knees in the kitchen and let the bitterness wash over me. Tears came fast, hot. In that moment, I was more than hurt. I was exposed, vulnerable, but I wiped my tears. No sense in letting them see weakness. I knew who I was. Grandma never raised someone to crumble at rumors. I called my attorney. He answered on the second ring. "We have work to do," I said, voice steady. I told him to issue a public statement, force their hand. I gathered evidence, the manipulated images, the metadata, the original files versus the doctored ones. I contacted Miranda Shaw, the tech journalist Grandma once trusted. She agreed to help trace the leaks. In her eyes, I saw respect. She wasn't doing me a favor, she was doing the truth justice. I filmed a video in my living room, the kind of video that would reach people beyond boardrooms and trade journals. I looked directly into camera. "You may know me from headlines, but let me tell you my story." I spoke of Grandma's vision, of legacy and trust, of how power should serve, not silence. I didn't sound defensive. I sounded real. I called out the culture that weaponizes personal history to silence women and families. The video went live within an hour and immediately sparked commentary. The tide shifted, not fully but noticeably. By evening, I left Austin and drove north to the family property in Dallas. I needed space. Mother called me on the drive. She was frantic, but I told her I'd be safe. I needed the quiet. At the property, dusk settled like a blanket I'd longed for. I dragged printouts, copies of headlines, screen grabs of tweets, magazine covers to the backyard. Under dim lamplight, I arranged them across a flat rock. Then I lit a match. One by one, each page caught flame, curled, turned black. Smoke rose skyward. My heart pounded at the heat, yet in that blaze was clarity. These lies would burn, not me. I stood watching as the embers glowed. The betrayal wasn't just public, it was personal. They attacked my name, twisted my past, tried to erase my integrity. But I was still standing, still here. My phone buzzed. I looked down. A message preview flashed hotter than any flame. "We have your next leak ready to go." The call came just after I'd thrown the last of the charred headlines into the fire pit. My phone lit up with a number I knew from the server room. "We've got a breach," the voice said. "Backup server's been wiped, admin credentials. Looks internal." I didn't even respond. I just ran, grabbed my keys, yelled for Vera to get in the car, and we tore down I-35 like our whole legacy was burning behind us. When we reached the data center, the night shift was already in chaos. One of the techs met us at the door, pale-faced. "The logs show access from inside," he whispered. "Cordell's credentials. Same proxy account he used last spring." I walked straight to the terminal, punched in my override codes. What I saw drained the heat from my face. Swaths of data scrubbed clean. Financial records, internal memos, email archives, even Grandma's digitized journals. Gone. "They didn't just wipe us," Vera muttered. "They tried to erase you." I nodded once. "No. They tried to delay me." And just like that, the war went underground. The scope of it hit me fast. This wasn't random sabotage. Cordell had targeted only the data that implicated him. Hidden transfers, off-books payments, board correspondence, all gone. He was erasing the evidence before the audit could begin. Worse yet, parts of Grandma's digital voice memos, the ones where she hinted at his manipulation, were also gone. I texted him right there from the server floor. "You're playing thief in broad daylight." He replied within minutes. "Sometimes you have to burn bridges to light a path forward." The man wasn't just ruthless, he was surgical. But he underestimated one thing. I never left the house without a second copy. By sundown, I was back at my private workspace, the place only Grandma and I ever used. I opened the locked drawer behind her bookshelf, and there it was, her original dossier. Every note, email printout, audio backup, physical and digital, meticulously sorted. She'd prepared for this long before I even understood what was coming. I fired up the offline server we'd kept untouched. Everything Cordell had tried to wipe still lived here. I launched the upload protocol, connecting it to an encrypted cloud. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. Quiet truth, but truth that would last longer than headlines. Then I drafted the invitation. Only 8 people, all trusted, all had served under Grandma. The message was short. Check your inbox at midnight. We begin where she left off. Attached was the blueprint for the Legacy Truth Initiative, a campaign of transparency, legal leverage, and company reform that would be bigger than both me and Cordell. No fanfare, no promises, just action. I could feel her again, in the way I chose my words, in the silence that followed. Patience before power. That was her. And just before midnight, I set one more thing in motion. The old family property hadn't changed much. The driveway still crunched the same. I waited by the oak tree, the one we used to climb as kids, the one she used to sit under with a lemonade and a book. Cordell arrived on time. He stepped out like he owned the place. His face gave away nothing. You forced my hand, he said. Data had to go. I kept my tone steady. You tried, but you forgot. I anticipated. I backed everything up here. I handed him a folder. Inside were printed screenshots, voice memos, receipts, financial leaks, enough to sink any narrative he was spinning. He looked at the papers. You want war? He said, voice low. Just remember, war destroys more than kingdoms. I didn't flinch. I won't destroy a kingdom, just the lies built in its name. He stared at me, jaw tight, then turned and walked off into the night, his shoulders a little tenser than when he arrived. As I watched his silhouette fade, I felt the wind shift. It wasn't over, but it had changed. The war wasn't a whisper anymore. It was here, and we both knew the lines had been drawn. The sky was still dark when I woke. No alarm, no noise, just that restless churn in my chest that comes when something's about to change, even if you don't know how yet. I sat up in bed and listened. Nothing but the soft groan of old wood and a distant train horn, too far to matter but familiar enough to ground me. I made my way to the porch, coffee in hand, wrapped in a hoodie Grandma used to wear when the mornings bit like this. Across the hills, the first stretch of pink light crawled toward the roofline. Church bells rang from town, slow and heavy. That sound always meant something in my childhood. Now it sounded like a toll for the past. This house didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like clarity, like a page turning. I pulled out my phone and replayed that old voicemail I'd saved years ago. Grandma's voice, soft but certain. Everything you need, you already carry. Back then, I thought she meant it metaphorically. But now, it felt like something else. A clue, a push, a whisper beneath the noise telling me to keep digging. After breakfast, I wandered back through the house, slow steps, quiet hands. I ended up in her bedroom, door still creaked the same way. I'd never touched this room much since she passed. It always felt too sacred, but today something nudged me forward. There was a photo of the two of us on her nightstand, same one from the garden in summer. Behind it, the back panel popped loose, like it was made to. I reached inside and pulled out a small brass key. I knew exactly what it belonged to. The top dresser drawer, the one always locked, finally gave way. Inside was a thick envelope sealed in red wax. No name. Just a sentence scribbled on the front. In case they break you, don't let them. I sat down. Hands steady. Heart anything but. The letter was written in her handwriting, familiar loops and quick strokes. But this wasn't her legal tone. It was raw. Honest. Human. She wrote about Cordell, about how she'd always known his ambition was brittle, how he craved respect but never earned it, how she'd tried to help him anyway, and how she feared one day he'd lash out not just at her, but at whoever came next. And that's why she wrote this. She told a story, one I'd never heard, about a betrayal she endured as a young woman, a business partner, a family friend, someone who tried to erase her, too, But she didn't retaliate. She survived. She built in silence until her presence couldn't be ignored. Reading her words, I saw my own life unfolding between the lines. At the bottom of the envelope was a thin gold bracelet, hers, worn, simple, always on her wrist. The inside was engraved, "Truth lasts longer than fear." I clasped it on, tight around my wrist. It didn't shine, it anchored. The last line of her letter read, "They will corner you with noise, but silence carries truth. Don't outscream them, outlive them." I exhaled, then stood up different. The rest of the day, I moved with a sense of direction I hadn't felt since this mess started. I sat down and began building my case, not just legal but emotional. I organized records, timelines, first-hand statements. But more than that, I shaped a story. Grandma's story, my story, the truth behind it all. I set the date, Friday, a full town hall, the first public event since the funeral. I sent calendar invites to every employee, every board member. If they were going to judge me, they'd at least hear me. Then I called the journalist again, the one who helped me before. I offered her everything, not just documents. Access, legacy, motive. She agreed without hesitation. That night, I dug through the family archives, letters, journals, handwritten notes. Grandma never meant for the press, but maybe meant for now. I built a digital timeline, not to defend myself, but to preserve what mattered. Finally, I called Kellen. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "We open the box." He didn't ask which one. He just replied, "I'll be there." The house was quiet again when I hit save on the last slide of my presentation. The screen faded to black, but something told me this wasn't an ending. And just as I leaned back in my chair, my phone buzzed. It was Kellen. His voice, low, steady. "You need to see what's inside that box. Now." I walked into the shareholder town hall wearing Grandma's deep navy suit, her fabric, her stern but gentle color. It felt right. Cameras surrounded me, flashes flickered, and murmurs rose beneath the high ceiling. Instead of dread, I felt steadied. Years of hidden work, bruises, whispers, all of it led me here. Cordell sat at the table, flanked by lawyers, arms folded, eyes calculating, but his composure was brittle. I stepped up to the podium and paused. I didn't begin with statements. I asked them, "Do you believe in legacy or in noise?" That silence that followed was thicker than any applause. The first slide appeared, "The Real Will," the one I recovered from the Austin deposit box, duly notarized and dated after the one they used publicly. I felt eyes shift. Some board members glanced sideways. Journalists leaned forward. Even Grandma's old friends in the crowd gasped. I revealed terms they'd never seen. I'm named sole CEO and heir in her final will. There were instructions, too. How the board should be restructured to prevent future abuse, how decisions must follow ethical audits, how power must always be servant to legacy, not ego. As I read her closing line aloud, "You are not what they said you were," I held up the gold bracelet on my wrist. Cordell tried to interrupt. The moderator's gavel tapped. "You'll have your turn," she said. Chaos erupted. Cordell's legal team moved to file an injunction mid-meeting charging mental manipulation and will contesting. But I had anticipated it. I produced forensic analysis, timestamps, digital logs, Grandma's state-of-mind recordings. I played a clip, her voice steady and sure. "If they question me, let them hear me. I chose her, not because she is my blood, but because she is my future." The judge ordered an immediate review of Cordell's actions and indefinitely delayed his injunction. Cordell stood and stormed out. I saw fear in his eyes for a moment. I shifted the tone back to vision. I turned the town hall into a roadmap for the future. Corporate reform, community partnerships, mentorship funds, giving back, rebuilding trust. Some skeptical board members stood to applaud. I walked the long hall afterward, passing portraits of past CEOs, pausing under Grandma's image. The bracelet warmed against my wrist. I whispered to myself, "It's done." That evening, I made my way into the garden she loved. The moonlight fell on her reading bench. I carried her final letter and placed it gently back in her old journal. A journalist approached, voice soft. "You didn't just win. You reminded us what power looks like with heart." The words felt like justice. As I reached my car, I saw a shadow leaning against it. A box sat on the hood. A stranger stood holding it, with a confident, knowing smile. The plate read, Private. Property of Lorraine W.